FunForLouis. How was your time? How was your trip?
Colombia.
Millions are suffering without basic necessities like food and running water. Medical supplies are in short supply. Millions more have fled Venezuela trying to escape a humanitarian disaster.
Those who can have already left. An estimated 3.5 million have fled, many of them to neighboring Colombia.
Venezuelans are struggling to survive hyperinflation and chronic shortages of medicine and food. Many families cannot afford even one meal a day.
This is the largest migration problem that has ever happened in the Western Hemisphere.
The problem that Venezuela is going through is like too big to wrap my head around. Right. Woo! We have come out here with an NGO who've been working with Venezuelan refugees. Some of you may know there's a crisis going on in Venezuela right now, and a lot of people have been flooding into Colombia. We're going to be meeting some of those refugees, seeing some of the projects that have been happening, starting with this school that we're visiting. It's like a safe space for young people, and we're going to be learning what they're doing here and just hearing some of the stories.
Oh, thank you. Gracias. Hola. Hola. Do we wear these?
Yeah. What do you think, guys?
My name is Grace Ramirez, and my family is from Venezuela. It's an oil-rich country, and there's a dictatorship going on, but masked under a socialist government. The reality is that if you don't have American dollars, or if you're not with the government, you're starving because you're making $7 a month and a piece of meat costs 10.
People can't afford any food. Like, imagine having your life savings and then it reduces to like by 2,000%. So you could have 100 grand and then it would be like down to $50. Suddenly your money's worthless. Like, they're making like bags and random things to sell out of the banknotes because it's like hyperinflation.
People are fleeing the country because they're starving or they're sick, but there isn't any, supplies. No matter how much money you have, you cannot find certain medicines. My grandmother was sick, and I experienced an episode where we, had gotten her this little bottle, so she has asthma. The kid next to me was dying because he didn't have that medicine. So I needed to share the medicine that I had bought for my grandmother with this kid that was dying because they couldn't find these drops for him.
Who invited you again?
So this organization, like an NGO called IsrAID, when there's like emergencies, like natural emergency, they go in for the immediate relief work, but they also then stay for years for the aftermath and like how to help rebuild. So their motto is like first in, last out.
What I can appreciate the most about the work that IsrAID is doing is that they're building a sustainable model. You're teaching them how to fish, and you're giving the community the tools to keep going themselves.
So this type of space, these type of child-friendly spaces, IsrAID is actually running this kind of model in many different places across the world, in both like immediately after disaster, when like schools are disbanded, because it's usually the first thing to go, right? Like straight after a disaster, it's all about food and shelter and water, and it's really not about schooling. So it's often we're putting these emergency child-friendly spaces up. So we're not bringing people in from abroad and like they stay and they come and they go. We're talking about really like building capacity and working together with a local community to invest for the long term. Everything we're doing is to kind of make sure that we're building the mental health resilience, right? So exactly what you saw yesterday. So there's tons of expressive arts, lots of different sporting activities which enable them to kind of act as a team.
The whole point of this trip was to see if we can work with IsrAID on future trips, bringing influencers with us to see the projects they're doing and like learn and educate people. So that was why I was like thinking, okay, group size is important, what we're doing on the ground. Like, obviously the main idea is we're not going there like as the saviors, that we're going to be the hero of the story, we're going to like help volunteer and like build a school or something. That's just not how, as nice as that intention is, that's not how real impact work works, even though for decades that's kind of what people's idea is. I'm going to go build a school in Africa. It's like, do you know how to build a school?
Yeah.
Maybe let someone else do that. This is more showing what's already happening and what's happening long term. You can't really do much impact in 2 days of being somewhere, even a week.
Yeah.
But what you can do, and especially having an influence, is like to share the stories.
I see other refugee crises, and like the Syrians, like and the world is talking about it. No one's talking about Venezuela. Not really.
Why is that?
I have no idea.
It's been a long day, guys. There's been a lot of information, all in Spanish, which is getting translated, but it's a very lengthy process for me to absorb it all and really understand what's going on. But I've learned some things. So this centre behind me was only built 6 months ago, and it's the first kind of safe place for youth that they've built in this area. This is also a central space to help not only the children, but the parents and the carers of these kids that can come here when they come to pick them up, but they also put on activities to involve them and help them with education as well, and just help kind of fuse the community together. So this is what these spaces are, and they say this is like the central way that they can bring help into these communities. So yeah, it's pretty cool. We're about to plant some trees now, apparently. The people coming in aren't like people that were in poverty. They were like successful doctors, teachers, like some of them very wealthy, and then suddenly they're like stripped of all of their kind of wealth and status, and then come into Colombia with nothing, and it's like you're starting in poverty.
Imagine it could happen to you. Because we live in America, we think we're immortal to these things. I myself have seen how financially vulnerable we could be, because from one day to another we could lose everything. When situations like this happen and we hear the word refugee, we think people are just poor people. But the irony is, most of these stories you hear, there were middle-class people who had a good job, who were working a corporate job, but the corporation collapsed and then they were left with nothing, and then they have no other possibility of getting another job. From being middle-class to poverty overnight.
The only places they could like start building community was in like super poor, kind of crazy, like the areas that we were looking at was like used to be swampland, and then they put rubble and sand on the swamplands to like make it like so you walk on it. So this housing district that we're stopped in was actually built on a swamp, so they just brought trucks in and dumped a load of sand and gravel and rubble to like bring the level up so they could build houses on top of it, but underneath it's still really unstable, so the houses are kind of like falling apart. It's not the most ideal place to live. Check it out, swamps right here. Shame there's so much plastic around. What I'm moving into is wanting to do more impact storytelling, where we'll go somewhere and talk about an issue and hopefully like help the audience emotionally connect to that issue, and then talk about, okay, what are the solutions, how can people get involved? And I guess the hard thing for me with this trip was like, I don't know, because obviously a lot of these stories and things we're talking about aren't like easily wrapped up in a bow and like delivered like here's a nice little kind of piece of content. It's like you have to kind of pull the story out of the 3 million refugees that have come into Colombia in the last 5 years. They're saying 1 million of those were children, and the projects that we saw in Barranquilla, which were amazing projects, they were helping like 90 to 100 children, which is great, but when you put it in perspective that there's 1 million kids to help, it feels like this isn't even a drop in the bucket. But you got to not think like that. That's what I keep reminding myself. I think what it is I have to recognise that I'm not going to understand in my head what this long-term solution is there, and that's okay. But there's organisations that are slowly making a difference, even if it's like 50 kids at a time.
Despite everything they've been through, these kids and these people, you felt so much warmth and love and happiness and faith. And there's a big lesson to take on this. If we first love ourselves and are the change we want to see, we take responsibility, and then we go out and give. And we're not just taking, me, want. I think those two things are how the world is going to change.
Well, it's been a pretty amazing couple of days. If you know more about the crisis, or you're Venezuelan, or you've got a particular passion for this, please let me know in the comments. I really would love to have an open dialogue and conversation about how we can be better at showing up. I know there's a lot of other issues around the world, but right now for this trip, this is the issue we're focused on. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace out, enjoy life, live the adventure. Boom.